You're very welcome to Season 3 of the Almanac, Folkways' sister show that is broadcast from our totally legal Soundboat studio, which can be found resting in different places each month. As I understand it, the ship has been wintering in Kirkcudbright on the banks of the River Dee. I was interested to learn that the place became a magnet for Scottish artists in the late 19th century and is now known as the Artist Town because of this association. So without further ado, let's try and pick them up. Warmest of welcomes imaginable to May 2023's Almanac. Here's Old Meg by John Keats to kick things off. Old Meg, she was a gypsy, and lived upon the moors. Her bed it was the brown heath turf, and her house was out of doors. Her apples were swart blackberries, her currants pods of broom. Her wine was dew of the wild white rose, her book a churchyard tomb. Her brothers were the craggy hills, her sisters larchen trees. Alone with her great family, she lived as she did please. No breakfast had she many a morn, no dinner many a noon, and 'stead of supper she would stare full hard against the moon. May is named for the Roman goddess Maia, who oversaw the growth of plants. In Old English, through Milkmanath, Welsh, Mai, Cornish, Ms May, in Scots Gaelic it's Incachan, and Irish, Beltane. As you likely know, the beginning of May is Beltane or May Day. This feast opens the warmer part of the year and we find all sorts of shenanigans associated with it. There used to be more of a focus on the two halves of the year, the lighter, warmer and the darker, colder, of which Beltane and Samhain, its opposite festival in October, stood at the gates of each. We've essentially lost this approach, this halving of the year, and therefore inevitably some of the significance or potency of these two festivals. This is why both Beltane and Samhain Halloween are both seen as liminal times. We are skimming the periphery of that tip into the warmer or colder half of the year. An early reference to Beltane was found in Sanus Cormaic, an early medieval Irish glossary, which writes that there were two fires which druids used to make with great incantations, and they used to bring the cattle against the disease of each year to those fires. Also, that they used to drive the cattle in between the fires in what looks like an act of protection and purification. And although the body of data regarding the rituals of Beltane is somewhat imperfect, as Professor Ronald Hutton states, there are certain conclusions that can be drawn. First, all over the ancient British Isles, summer was reckoned as beginning around the time which was to become the opening of May. Secondly, that in a pastoral economy, this was the period when livestock could be driven out to the new grass of the pastures. Again, think there to that reference of the Sanus Cormaic, of the driving of cattle between the lucky fires. And thirdly, the rituals were conducted at this moment, the beginning of May, to protect against the powers of evil, natural and supernatural, not merely in the season to come, but because those malign powers were supposed to be particularly active at this turning point of the year. So kindle those fires, boys and girls, even if it's just a tea light on your desk, and welcome the incoming warmer half of the year with open hands and even hearts. We're going for the peas in this season. If you woke up in Portishead, Bristol on the 1st of May, you saw the sunrise at 5:43 and set at 20:33. Portrush, Northern Ireland, sunrise 5:46 and set at 21:02. And Perth, Scotland, sunrise 5:29 and set 20:54. Meaning, give or take, We've got around 15 hours of daylight at the moment. That's a nice thought. The moon is full on Friday the 5th of May and is known as the Mother's Moon, Bright Moon, Hare Moon, Grass Moon, and the Old English Milk Moon. It'll then start melting in the sky until the new moon on Friday the 19th of May. The constellation of Cassiopeia is now low over the northern horizon to the east of the meridian. High up, Ursa Major has started to swing around to the west, and the stars that form the extended portion of the legs and paws of the bear are becoming easier to see. The whole of the constellations of Cepheus, Draco, Lyra and Ursa Minor are also easy to see. On this month in 1902, divers recovered a remarkable mechanism from the wreck of a Roman vessel that had foundered off Antikythera, Greece. The studying of the markings of the device first suggested it was used for astronomical calculation. It has since become known as the Antikythera mechanism. Highly sophisticated techniques such as modern computer-assisted 3D X-ray tomography have now become available for study of the device. These have revealed not only some of the complex internal gearing, but also some of the written instructions on the outside of the device. It's now obvious that the mechanism was an extremely complicated and amazingly accurate device for the computation of astronomical events, in particular the motions of the sun, moon and planets, and for predicting forthcoming eclipses. The date at which the device was created remains uncertain, lying within the range of about 200 BCE to 60 BCE. Coming down from the heavens now to the hedgerows, this month look out for the froth of elder, cow parsley and of hawthorn blossom in every hedgerow, plus of course those bluebells. On verges you'll see red campion and white dead nettles too. Mid-month see damselflies and dragonflies merging from vegetation at the edges of ponds and rivers. You can also enjoy the noisy peak of the dawn chorus in May, where birds sing with everything they've got for mates and territory. Bad luck if you're still awake at about 3 AM. For foraging, the seaweeds are at their freshest and sufficiently well developed to make collecting worthwhile, and the seashore as a whole has come alive with many of the succulent green plants in full leaf. Having got the foot ferry over to Mersey Island with Big Sky, I sustained myself on a particularly long walk by eating seaweed. It looks just like spinach but is far superior in taste and texture, and you'll have no trouble spotting it on coastal mudflats and field edges. April and May are the so-called green months when everything is fresh, so also find fennel, watercress, wild onion and yarrow, to name only a few. As ever, please check with a professional or a guidebook before picking anything that you're not sure about. For this season, I thought it might be nice to focus on different geographical locations in each show, just as a way of highlighting interesting places. This was somewhat inspired by a tangled knot of trees protruding into my mind one morning, the adder-infested Wistmans wood. Wistmans is surely Britain's most famous fragment of temperate rainforest, sometimes called Celtic rainforest, and it's one of only 3 surviving upland oak woods on Dartmoor. Let's check out what the local Reverend Sweet declared about Wistmans wood in 1797. It is hardly possible to conceive anything of the sort so grotesque as this wood appears. Silence seemed to have taken up her abode in this sequestered wood, and to a superstitious mind some impression would have occurred approaching to dread or sacred horror. Wistmans is certainly a remarkable, unearthly place. Once you walk into the tangled web of trees, you're transported into a mystical world of moss-carpeted boulders, lichens of all descript, finger-like oak branches, all engulfed in a wonderful smell of earth and age, the stunted trees clinging to the high moors above a lonely stretch of the East Dart River. What stands today is all that remains of a far larger forest that likely dated back thousands of years. This remaining 9 acres is a copse of twisted and gnarled oak trees growing on a steep valley side, made up of huge granite boulders through which the trees have forced their way seemingly. So these are not mighty oaks in stature. Even the oldest trees stand at perhaps 20 feet high on average. They are mainly English oak with occasional rowan and a very few holly, hawthorn, hazel and eared willow. The English oak being deciduous, being in Wistmans in early May, sees fresh, light green leaves covering many of the trees. It's certainly a different vibe to a visit in January, say, in which the bare, skeletal branches have an even more dramatic profile. And even if the May sky currently looks blue, as you peer up through the knot of branches, always be prepared as the weather can change dramatically on the moor. The name of Wistmans Wood may derive from the dialect word wisht, meaning eerie or uncanny, or pixie-led or haunted. There's also the suggestion that it may be from the Saxon word to know, meaning wood of the wise man. Wistmans is regularly described as the most haunted place on Dartmoor, from bloody hellhounds to the devil, venomous adders, to the hooded druid protectors of this ancient place. In regard to the druids, the local legend is that the wood was a sacred home to them, as an often quoted passage from Eliza Bray's 1844 Legends, Superstitions and Sketches of Devonshire suggests. Also that it was one of the last places in the country where druids carried out their rituals. Whether or not this is true, you may see some labyrinths and other carvings on the rocks, suggesting the woods were used at least as a spiritual site for our ancestors. One of the most fascinating legends, however, associated with this patch of Dartmoor must surely be the Wild Hunt. The trees are meant to be inhabited by hellhounds, black, vicious, demonic dogs with glowing eyes and a taste for blood. Come nightfall, the woods turn from sacred sanctuaries into kennels for the wished hounds, who hunt across the moors, followed by their leader, the wild huntsman. The dogs are said to have a howl that echoes along the misty moors when they're out chasing prey. So the Wild Hunt is an ancient legend with roots in primal pagan beliefs, which will no doubt be looked at in the Folkways main show at another time. But just for now, I thought I'd leave you with that image of those salivating dogs coursing across the moors. For these reasons, and no doubt others, take a page out of the locals' book, who is said never to venture near the woods once the sun begins its descent over the nearby granite outcrops. The wagging finger of fate warns you to stay clear and risk not your mortal soul in the wood of the wise men. On a slightly less supernatural note, the wagging finger of local conservationists have asked for visitors to refrain from climbing through the trees and instead walk around them in light of recent damage to the woods to let them recuperate for a bit, which sounds reasonable to me. May Day or Beltane, especially the eve before it, April the 30th, is, as we've mentioned earlier, firmly wedded to the uncanny, with the fairies, the Tulith Teg or the She, known as being particularly active on this night. These accounts are generally not sweet children's stories, but rather tell of the personal people involved being in real danger. One can only imagine the strange goings-on one might witness if they found themselves in Wistmans Wood on the eve of May the 1st. On a final note, once you've survived May Day Eve, the beginning of May is certainly one of my favourite times. Outside seems to be pulsing with an unstoppable energy. It's easy to miss it when we're just thinking about ourselves, stuck in our heads, which we're increasingly encouraged to do, it seems. But once you do start looking around, and I mean actually seeing the state of each tree that you pass as you walk by, or the froth, a word I used earlier, of the hedgerow that you pass on your way to work, you wonder how you could ever have missed it before. And finally, if you're looking for some seasonally appropriate media to consume, come on, it's time to get a cold one and rewatch The Wicker Man. I believe I mentioned this last year, but I'd also like to recommend the 1953 short film by Alan Lomax, Os Os We Os, which documents the May Day festivity at Padstow in Cornwall. You will find a link to it in the show notes. It's beautifully shot, historically valuable, and I'm pleased to say that celebrations still continue in Padstow, as you may know, on May to this day.